Hi everybody, I'm back again, and because I haven't made a video in a while, I've been rather busy, and the people that run the studio have been busy also. I'm going to try and get through 4 different subjects in this one video if I can. So I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. The first one will be the Garden of Eden. The second one, statues on Mars. The third one, wait a minute, I've missed one. Hang on. The second one will be Dogman. The third one will be statues on Mars. And the fourth and last one will be the Van Allen belt. Okay? Now, you may, if you are interested, to be able to read these as downloads on our website. Unfortunately, we haven't got the website on what's all behind me, so I'll quickly say it. It's www.thegreatwhitebrotherhood, all one word, .org, O-R-G. www.thegreatwhitebrotherhood.org. Okay? Anyway, let's get on. We'll start with the Garden of Eden. Now, I made a short while ago a video about Adam and Eve. And somebody wrote to me and said that Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden. Could I talk about that? So I got in touch with the Great White Brotherhood, who gave me all this stuff. And they gave me some information about the Garden of Eden. Now, I'm just going to read it to you, okay? The story about the Garden of Eden is, of course, yet another spiritual message to help us understand more about the path to God. Just as the story of Adam and Eve mentioned that obtaining knowledge about God helps us to approach the throne of God, so the Garden of Eden helps us to understand the beautiful spiritual world we can create as and when we accept God into our lives. The Garden of Eden, of course, never existed as a physical place, although the early saints who were able to enter what is known as the Summerland in the astral realms may well have been attempting to describe what they saw. Now, what they're saying is that the Garden of Eden is actually Summerland, which is where you go to when you first die. It is interesting that if we read the biblical version of Eden and man being cast from it, we detect the all too familiar hand of the archons. And if you don't know what the archons are, go to the site I mentioned, which I'll put in the description below anyway, and check them out. These are evil thought forms almost. They're almost like an artificial intelligence, but they're not. They're actual sort of beings, astral beings, and they're very, very nasty. Anyway, the truth about Eden, assuming that we are referring to the spiritual area known as Summerland, is that virtually all of us at the end of our incarnation arrive there and can spend as much time as we wish there before moving on to higher or lower dimensions, which is just what I mentioned. So, excuse me. So, as usual, the archons turned this fact upside down and created a story where we do not arrive in this place, but started off there and were kicked out because of an invented sin. The very thing they created concerning Eve, revealing hidden knowledge. So you can see that the story about the Garden of Eden is closely linked to the story of Adam and Eve, but twisted to make all of it the opposite of the truth. So, we repeat, the story in the Bible of this happy couple who created a living hell for all mankind by eating the fruit from the tree of life and thus being cast from the Garden of Eden is the complete opposite of the truth. The real story, we say again, is that Adam represents the physical part of all people. Eve represents the spiritual part, and the apple represents the experiences we undergo during our lives that is fed via our oversoul into the Godhead. The Garden of Eden is the paradisical place we return to at the end of our incarnation. What a shame that so many people have and will have had the wool pulled over their eyes by these false messages designed to create fear and despondency, instead of the truth concerning an interesting life following the path to perfection and the expectancy of arriving in the Garden of Eden at the end of an incarnation. We should all look forward to going to that beautiful place when we leave physicality, instead of the dreaded fear that an evil, psychotic God will cast us into hell for some fault, real or imagined. Okay, now that's that one, and I'll leave it with you. It's not hard to understand. You're basically saying that the Garden of Eden is Summerland that we all go to at the end of our incarnations down here. Okay? And I've been there, and it's a beautiful place. Okay, now, second one, Dogman. Once again, from the Great White Brotherhood. We, the Great White Brotherhood, are, of course, aware of the existence of the creatures you know as Dogman. They are a race of creatures that are the result of genetic experiments carried out by a previous group of humans that were themselves largely exterminated by an ELE long ago. And ELE means elimination event. It wipes everything out. Quite why these creatures were created, we do not know. This previous civilization created many hybrid animals that we have mentioned before: centaurs, minotaurs, mer people, merman, merwomen, and so on. At the time of this ELE, what is it? Something elimination level experience or something like that. Anyway, it's something that wipes out all life. At the time of this ELE, most of all life was exterminated, but some survived, including a few of these dogmen. Genetically, they are canine with a human element. In other words, they're dogs or wolves mixed with human genes that this previous race managed to get together somehow. This gives them the ability to hunt like dogs or wolves, but also gives them sufficient human intelligence to think much like man can. They now exist in a number of countries, including America. They tend to live in isolation and in relative peace concerning humanity, but if their territory is invaded by man, or what they consider to be an invasion, they can and do defend themselves with great strength, both physical and mental. Like many species that have survived for long periods of time and that have sufficient intelligence, they have learnt to use what we refer to as psychic skills, telepathy, teleportation, and the ability to move at will into the etheric planes. Now, teleportation, if you don't know what that means, is the ability to just disappear from here and suddenly appear somewhere else, okay? The ability to move into the etheric planes means they just totally disappear and move into another dimension. They communicate amongst themselves by telepathy, although they have been heard to make yapping sounds when so doing, the result of trying to express their thoughts both verbally and mentally through their blend of human and canine genetics. They can disappear from one spot and reappear in another, which I just mentioned, or just disappear from view by moving into the etheric planes. It is unfortunate that their interactions with man happens with increasing frequency, but that is largely because man interferes with their habitats, the forests and so on. People roam in wild areas with increasing frequency. People hunt and thus kill the animal food that the dogman eats, so they see man as a competitor. Lastly, the destruction of their habitats occurs more and more as forests are decimated, with all this logging that goes on. These creatures are more than capable of defending themselves, and they will retaliate when they or their habitats are menaced. It would be better if they were recognized as a species, as Bigfoot should be recognized, and placed on the list of endangered species because, although they are far from endangered, being quite able to defend themselves, if man would leave them in peace, they would leave man in peace. We will also say that the increasing numbers of hunters that kill all that moves in forests, all the little animals and the deer and goodness knows what, deprive these creatures of the food, and thus hunters wandering about in what is left of the forests, or their food, that deprive these creatures of their food, and thus hunters wandering about in what is left of forests will encounter these creatures from time to time and, in all probability, will be attacked by them. These dogmen are merely defending the food source that they rely on for their survival. And that's that one. I'm sorry to be flying through this, but I want to get through these four and not take up too much of your time. Now, statues on Mars. You may have seen on YouTube all these people that scan these NASA images, these photos, and find remnants, little statues and parts of walls and what they consider to be cities and all that sort of thing. So I asked about it, and this is the reply. The statues and apparent remains of buildings on Mars are the result of the various races that we mentioned in the previous talk that tried to claim ownership of Mars. And now in a talk some time ago, the Great White Brotherhood described how various races of people fought over Mars and the reptilians finally won. But before the battles were going on, these various races of beings in their astral form claimed bits of Mars for themselves, okay? Rather like humans have claimed bits of land for themselves. Right, now we're talking about the statues. They were produced by using etheric material which they formed with their minds and lowered the frequency of until they became solid objects. This apparent miraculous technique has often been used in various parts of the galaxy for a variety of reasons. Now, what that means is that if you've got sufficient mind power, you can actually visualize something in your mind. Then when you form the image of that, lower the frequency from that astral level down into physical level, and it will appear as something physical. That's how Jesus was able to feed the 5,000 with just a few fish and a few loaves of bread. He visualized it going on and on and on, and it did. And skilled and advanced people can do that. And apparently that's what these aliens were doing. In the case of Mars, once a particular space group claimed ownership of a portion of Mars, some of them, not all, decided to mark their ownership by producing artifacts of various kinds, some of which were placed within the portion of land claimed, and some of which were placed as boundary markers. It must be appreciated that all this took place long before any humans on Earth had developed the ability to build similar artifacts. Now, this was all done hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years ago, okay, long before we were able to do anything like that. Once the planet Mars was lost to the reptilians, the surface of the planet largely destroyed, and once the planet of Mars was lost to the reptilians, the surface of the planet largely destroyed, the aliens approached Earth. They created similar structures and statues on Earth, most of which have been lost through various elimination, extinction events, or whatever it is, the ELE, that have wrought havoc on Earth from time to time. Occasionally, an object or a piece of an object of great antiquity is discovered on Earth that archaeologists tend to ignore or hide from view. These sometimes are remnants remaining of the creation of these aliens. The technique of being able to create an image in etheric or astral form and lowering its vibration until it appears in physical form is a fairly simple manipulation of frequency which has not yet fully been mastered by modern man, but which is a technique that will be rediscovered as man moves more into the light in the future. As everything is just frequencies, one can easily imagine that to form an object in one frequency and to reduce that frequency until the object appears in a different frequency is not that difficult. It does, of course, require a mastery of the manipulation of frequencies, but modern man will one day master it. Then will food, housing, clothing, and everything that humanity requires be produced at will, just by thought. That'll be a good thing, won't it?
Right, now, the last one is the Van Allen belt. In case you don't know what that is, it's a belt of radioactivity that surrounds the planet Earth and effectively stops anybody that wants to go out into space to visit the moon, for example, or further, because they would need to pass through it, and it would apparently kill any astronaut that went through it. Well, I asked the Great White Brotherhood about the Van Allen belt, and this is what they told me. The dangerous radioactivity emitted by the Van Allen belt is the result of a huge nuclear explosion that took place long ago by a previous intergalactic civilization that was at war with another similarly advanced race of beings. This group lived long ago in Earth times, and history has retained no memory of them. These races we could call human, but would not be recognized by modern man as resembling the human form of man as we know it now, nor did they act or think as modern man does today, both the good and the evil. They were completely different and lived by different standards to modern man. However, they were extremely advanced in the use of technologies and had developed deep space travel using techniques that are not available to anyone today. They were extremely advanced in the use and manipulation of scientific techniques. We break off to say that there is virtually no limit to the length that science can go in its development of using both physical and auric matter. As the secrets of how matter, both physical and spiritual, is constructed, it opens the door to producing effects, both positive and negative. To return to these previous races, they had produced wonderful things both in the physical and in the auric fields, for these people could move across the barriers between fields or dimensions with ease, which means they could go from 3D world into the spiritual planes without any problems. They did not live on Earth, and we cannot really say on which planet they did live, because they had terraformed various planets that no longer exist in our reality. It must be understood that planets, being alive and having consciousness, like we've got, are able to evolve or devolve according to the desire of the prime intelligence contained in association with those planets. So there are a number of former planets in the galaxy that have evolved to pure spirituality and could only be observed by those whose consciousness is sufficiently developed so as to be able to see into the higher spiritual frequencies. In other words, they would be invisible to our 3D eyes and only could be seen with psychic vision. There are also, strange as it may seem, a small number of planets that took the opposite route and devolved until the life essence of the planet was reduced to neont, which means nothingness, and the planets concerned crumbled back into the dust from which they were made. These long ago beings lived on and around those planets. Now, the ones that devolved, it means that the life spirit gave up and the planet just crumbled into nothingness. Now, as is often the case, conflict arose between at least two of these groups. Just what the conflict was about is lost in the mists of time, but the disagreement was of sufficient stature. Sorry, my stomach's rumbling. Was of sufficient stature as to provoke eventually open war. These races of beings had developed terrible weapons of both attack and defense, far in excess of anything that modern man could comprehend. This war escalated until the inevitable happened. A vast nuclear bomb was exploded. The remnants of this nuclear bomb remains today and has formed what is known as the Van Allen belt. Fortunately for modern man, it is contained by spiritual forces at a distance that does not affect us, both in the physical and the spiritual sense. Nuclear energy produces vibrations that can extend far beyond the physical realm and can be noxious to life in higher realms also. Now, what they're saying there is that there's some angelic forces that limit the spread of this Van Allen belt and just contain it in this one band. And they also stop it from going into the higher realms where angels and other advanced creatures live, because it can affect them also, which is why advanced aliens asked us long ago to stop letting off nuclear bombs. We will not describe the beings using technology to contain this Van Allen nuclear energy, nor will we expand on the techniques used. Rest assured that if it was not for the untiring efforts of these beings, the Van Allen radiation would spread far and wide and would destroy planet Earth and all life upon it. Regarding the beings that provoked the explosion, history has no further record of them. It may be that they were eliminated in the explosion, or it may be that they have evolved beyond our knowledge. Our records, this is the Great White Brotherhood speaking, our records are not endless, and although some information concerning these long ago races have been preserved, we do not have a complete record, and we will not speculate. Lastly, we will say that modern scientific conjecture as to the origins of the Van Allen belt is just pure imagination. What we have stated here is the truth concerning the formation of the Van Allen belts. We will also note that modern man in their primitive rocket ships could never traverse the Van Allen radiation belts without the astronauts sustaining irremediable radiation damage. Alien visitors to Earth skip over the belts using the jump techniques that we have formerly mentioned. Thus, any likelihood of man returning to the moon using rockets is pure fiction, as scientists know. Now, that's the end of that. Now, I've given you 4 very quick subjects to think about. You may need to sort of stop them one after the other and study what you want from them. Any questions, please ask, and I'll do my best to answer. And I hope to come back in the not too distant future with a bit more information for you. Okay, for now, I'll say thank you very much for watching this and the other videos, and goodbye.